welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us today as we continue in our Lenten journey. We're in the season of Lent together, and we're moving towards the season of Easter. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined, as always, by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hi.
Welcome, Matt. So we are in this Lenten journey. We're just a few weeks away from the Easter Triduum. That's the celebration of the Lord's Supper, Good Friday, Easter Vigil, Easter Sunday. And every week really has been an opportunity for us to reflect on the scriptures and to integrate them into our life while we're taking on our Lenten practices, our Lenten fasting, our prayer, and our almsgiving. And this past weekend, for those parishes not engaged in the rite of RCIA, or OCIA, as it's coming to be known, we heard the reading of the Prodigal Son. This is from Luke chapter 15. And today we're going to unpack the story of the Prodigal Son, and hopefully it will lead to bear some fruit in your life during this Lenten journey. So we heard the reading on Sunday. It was proclaimed as the gospel. So we're going to just read and reflect on that story now, and then we're going to break it open to see where the Lord speaks to us today. So if you're listening here to the podcast, you're listening to this reading of the scriptures, maybe if you're not driving, to close your eyes or to maybe just open your heart and just to receive God's word. And let's help this to be a good reflection for us as we continue on in this fourth week of Lent, heading towards the fifth Sunday and beyond. Okay, so this is a reading from the Gospel of Luke. All the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them a parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So the father divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. The young man would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. The slave replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then the elder son became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. So this is the story of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15. And hopefully you had a moment to reflect on it as we proclaimed it here today on the Catholic Buzz. And so we're going to just break open this parable because first and foremost, we know that when Jesus speaks in parables, he's communicating something important to us. So right off the bat, there's so many things that kind of jump out in my mind, in my heart when I hear this story. What would some of those things be for you, Matt?
So there's actually so much going on in here that it would just take a lot to unpack. Like even if you just look at the context, so like just kind of the framework, it's important that he's talking to the Pharisees, that he's actually rebuking the Pharisees, because these are the people, and what they're trying to call Jesus on is he's associating with sinners. He's doing what's unlawful. This is their kind of normal approach to Jesus, that he doesn't have a proper understanding of the law, a proper implementation or practice of the law. You constantly have the Pharisees coming to Jesus and challenging him on some article of the law, and he responds not in the way they expect, not in the way that he doesn't speak. He tells them a story, basically, which is especially infuriating for the Pharisees because, again, their main expression of the faith is, understanding the law, prioritizing which are the greatest commandments. That's what they're coming at him with. So they want a checklist for salvation. Give me the thing that I need to do. And he confounds them by telling them a story. And it points to what in kind of biblical study or biblical hermeneutics is a difference between exegesis and eisegesis. So exegesis is what we're most familiar with. We're in an age of systematic theology, and we want to codify Scripture and give a set of rules, give a set of expectations. But the way that Jesus teaches a lot of the time is eisegetical. It's just like, I'm inviting you to inhabit the story that I'm about to tell you. As we kind of unpack it, a lot of us early in our faith identify with the younger son. It's a story of conversion. It's a story of recognizing that without God's grace, we can't flourish in the way that we should, and that is the context for repentance. As we get kind of more mature in our faith, we can easily see ourselves as the older son, as we're following the rules, and it seems unjust that others get the benefit, or in some cases more attention and more reward than we are, and we're trying to do the right thing. But even when you're talking about having people in your life who are going off the rails or making bad decisions, and you can easily put yourself in the viewpoint of the father, and just how do we respond to these people when they're living this lifestyle, but also how do we show mercy if and when they kind of amend their ways or recognize. So it's an invitation to put ourselves in the perspective of all of those people. And again, it's important that he's speaking to the Pharisees, because these are the people who would very easily identify as the older son. We're doing all the right things. We're checking all the boxes. Those are the people that need to convert. Those are the people that need a better understanding.
Why is Jesus spending time with the sinners?
Exactly.
Right? Like that whole thing. Yeah.
So even before we get into the content of the parable, that's kind of an important context.
Anything jump out for you there? Just an initial reading of the text.
There's a lot. I mean, I love that it starts off with the father had two sons, because I think a lot of times we do jump into the spot of the sons, but a lot of times whenever Jesus is talking about a parable, the way that we got to dissect a parable is, where is God in all of this? Like, what if you can figure out where Jesus is or where God is in this parable, then it's easier to place ourselves inside the parable. But as Matt was saying, like you could be, you're the one of the sons. This parable is a little easier, right? So like we're one of the sons, either son, depending on our faith journey, and then even sometimes is we are the father as well, having to forgive, forgive and love with no bounds, right? And so all of that, but looking to see where God is. Well, God is the Father in this one. That's the easy one for the prodigal son. Other parables a little bit harder sometimes to discern, but this is where God is. And so we can put ourselves in the other spots. And as Matt was suggesting, going from one to the other. But the father had two sons always just kind of stood out to me. But there's a lot more in it that also kind of stands out. One of the big ones is what happens when the son comes back. And part of that is because you got to understand a little bit more that these families, not of these families, but even the villages that they were living in were just really extended families, right? They're all very closely related in these little villages with each other's lives and everything else. And so there's other stuff that's going on outside of this parable that they would have automatically understood to be going on because they would have been bringing into that. Yeah. And so, bringing dishonor on your father like that would have set the town up to be, I think it's right called, I was looking it up, kazeza. And so kazeza is when if you as a son were to dishonor your father so heavily that it would really affect the town, right? Because you're all extended family and everything else. The extended family would get together as a town and save your father the embarrassment, would go and punish you, would stone you, would throw rocks and say you're not welcome back in this town. We don't want to have your father have to deal with you. And so that's all the kind of thing. So one of the big ones is that we hear is that the father was watching. And then what did the father do? He ran to his son. And he ran to his son. And one of the things that really stood out to me when I knew this context was he was running to his son to be there before anybody could do anything, before anybody could say anything. And what did he do? The very first thing he did was he put a robe on his back. He put the ring back on his finger, and he put sandals on his feet. And again, the sandals are a form of slaves didn't wear sandals. You know what I mean? Like it's a form of prestige, if you will. And what was he saying was, as he walked his son back through the village to his house, he was saying, no, he's mine. Like no one is going to do anything to this boy. I love him. He's mine. And showing the people how to love. You know what I mean? So it's kind of another just a side context that really always stood out to me as the father running. The son seeing the father run at him and thinking, oh man, I'm going to get stoned, face plants and says, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? But then the father picking him up and then putting the ring and just, son had a completely wrong idea. Those are the things that stand out to me. Yeah,
not to jump ahead, but I think that's a really important detail. And this is one of the things that like I should have mentioned talking about eisegesis. It was like, okay, well, who are the characters? Like, and I said, we could inhabit the perspective of each of these people, but at another level, the Father is God. The banquet is heaven. The story is our story of conversion and being restored to sonship through salvation. Those types of things. But like with an exegetical approach, you're like, you want to know what is the meaning, definite article of this parable. The great thing about eisegesis is that it means all of these things at the same time, and actually the interplay of these different meanings it adds a significance to the parable. But that detail that like he saw him a long way off.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't see people a long way off on the horizon unless you're looking for them.
Yeah.
So it's like that. This is the perspective of God, and like God doesn't wait just kind of imperiously for him to come, and come and apologize, and then, then I'll go meet him, or then I'll restore him to like he runs. He's just like So I think just
to save him from any punishment, to save him from anything that he could have done, and the other part that kind of stands out for me, but I get this with the older son. The older son getting a little bit angry, I kind of get, but that's because, again, we're jumping ahead, but the older son, because what did the father do? He split his inheritance and gave the younger son his half. Yeah. So that means that everything that the father owns now is the older son's, right? Like everything else goes to the older son. So when the father runs to the younger son and puts a cloak on his back and puts a ring on his finger. Whose cloak and ring are that, really?
Yeah.
That's the older sons. Whose sandals are those? That's actually the older son's sandals. I mean, again, that's the father's right now, but if he passed away. And so when he says, go kill the fatted calf, that's the older son's fatted calf. So there is like, but it is the father that, I mean, it is the father's, but it is, doesn't matter what's going on right now. I want this person to know how much I love them. Like, you know what I mean? That's kind of like dropping everything. It's kind of cool.
And Jesus tells this parable after he tells the parable of the lost sheep, right?
Yeah.
Which one of you would, leave the
Leave your
99
99
behind to go in search of the one that's lost, right? So there's some continuity there. Right off the bat, one of the things that strikes me is this younger son's desire to leave home.
Yeah.
Like that's what really struck me. It's like he had everything at home.
Yeah.
He had wealth. He had hired hands. He had inheritance. He had a loving father. Like he had these things.
Everything that I would want right now. Yeah.
And he decides, no, it would be better for me to leave this situation and go somewhere that's foreign to me.
Yeah.
Right. And to go somewhere foreign and to squander the inheritance. Like that desire inside of him to seek something other than what he has, even though it's not right.
Yeah.
Like that struck me because that's, I think, something that's could be in all of us.
Yeah.
Like
Original sin right there.
We could be having, everything we need to keep us comfortable, everything we need to keep us supported, our faith life going well, like all these things. And yet something could be inside of us that's desiring something other than what we have, desiring other, even if it's not right. And so that's what really struck me reading this parable this week, because, sometimes we think like, you guys have raised children. Sometimes you think we raise our children right. They have everything that they need. They have all these. This son, he had everything he needed, and he still wanted to disobey. He still wanted, and he knew that asking for his inheritance would very much offend his father.
Yeah.
And the consequences that he would have to suffer by leaving, this with the family and all these things. So he would rather have that than...
What is he saying to his father when he says, I want my inheritance now? He's basically saying, I wish you were dead, right? Like that is kind of the words that are like, without saying those words, but that's what he's saying. Like, hey, give me what I need now. Like, I wish you were dead so I could just take off. Like, that's what I want. But when you were saying that, it just kind of struck me why we do this reading in Lent. And one of the reasons that I was just realizing is because we have desires, and we do have the desires in us. We have that original sin. We have the desires to want more. And that's what always skews us. So things like eating food. Eating food is good, but eating too much food is gluttonous. Sex is good, but sex in a wrong way or perversion of sex because we don't want just the regular sex. We want other sex. Like that can be it's perversion again, and that can be adulterous or whatever. There can be a lot of different things attached to it. But sleeping is good. But so a lot of times, one of the things that just kind of came to mind there is we use the season of Lent to gain self-control for ourselves, and so we take on. We give up certain suffering, certain things that we enjoy, certain things that we enjoy, so that we can train our spiritual selves, but train our physical selves, train our whatever selves, to have some self-control, so that when temptation comes calling, we can say no, right? And that's kind of what we do, and that's kind of what part of this is, like seeing ourselves as the younger son is. If we are training ourselves, if we're like he wanted more, but he didn't need any more, and so saying, okay, take some self-control there. And, do you see that tie there? Yeah. I just came to mind as you're saying it.
And what you're saying about like that the desire is a distortion of a good desire. So like the son wanting his inheritance, that's participating in a biblical trope that goes back through the Old Testament. And again, just from like how parables function as kind of a teaching tool, that a lot of times they refer to previous iterations of the trope to inform the expectations of the audience. So, a man had two sons. Okay, how many Bible stories, how much of the Old Testament, the premise is a father and two sons.
Yeah.
That it's like it's connected to those stories. So there's a really interesting kind of asymmetry with Jacob and Esau, and we talked about this in a speed round. We talked about why does God hate Esau? And the conclusion we came to is that Esau doesn't understand his birthright, or it doesn't understand the value of his birthright, and he seeks material welfare more than kind of the legacy, the inheritance, the identity that comes from that. And Jacob is the one who actually inherits because he actually values it. So in this case, you have the prodigal son who understands his inheritance purely in material terms.
Yes.
And he's just like, I want my inheritance. Well, it's not bad to want your inheritance. It's not bad to want kind of the fulfillment of the identity that have grown into. It's just like, but the problem is that he sees that in isolation of his relationship to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
That he's trying to I want the material part of this, and I want to go do my own thing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there's a parallel with the older son as well. That his grievance, or the thing that he's upset about, are the material things. And you were saying that, yes, that's part, the older son would get a double share of the inheritance, but whatever's left after the son took off, should come to the older son, that he's like, you've never given me a goat that I could celebrate with my friends. Like his grievance is like, I've done all this work. I've participated in this, but I'm not getting the spoils. I'm not getting the nice material things.
I like how in the story that the gospel implies, this guy goes and squanders the inheritance, right? And where does he end up? He ends up with the pigs.
Not only the
dirt,
pigs. Yeah, the pigs too are significant though, because for the Jewish people, pigs, the reason why they weren't allowed to eat pigs, God said don't eat the pigs, right? But pigs also were scavengers, and so they ate the dead bodies, that the carcasses of the chickens were left behind or whatever. So pigs would follow in the wild and just eat whatever, but specifically they were scavengers, and so you didn't want to eat them because you could get very sick, because you don't know what kind of diseases they were carrying and everything else. And so there's a lot to pigs in the Old Testament, but specifically the Jewish people. But he was feeding the pigs, so he was eating. The pigs were on the worst end. You would never want to eat a pig. It would be like us wanting to eat a rat or something. You know what I mean? You'd never want to do that. But it wasn't even that. It was the food that the rats were eating. It was the food that the pigs were eating. And he was looking at that going, that's all I have to eat now is the lowest of the low. You know what I mean? And that's the part that he's at right now. And so it wasn't the slop for the goats or the whatever. It was the slop for the pigs, the pods for the pigs. Yeah. And he's looking at it going, okay, even my father's servants eat better than this. Yeah. And to come back and to sell himself, I mean, this part of understanding too is that he went and he squandered his inheritance. We know that, but we don't exactly know what. I mean, if you read from the comic book style, he was gambling in a casino, or he was, whatever the case may be, but we don't really know how he wasted the money. It just says he wasn't smart with it. He didn't do...
The brother accuses him of going to prostitutes.
Oh, yeah, does he? Yeah, okay, at the end, okay, yeah. So we have an idea. But then it's like he's going to come back and sell himself into slavery to his father, because he figures that's all that I have now wasted all the goodness that we have. So how many times have we, figuring that we need to, and again, this kind of come back to the other point that I made, but self-control is we need something more. So we need more food, we need more, and selling ourselves into it, and then being at the point where we've sold ourselves into slavery, into sin again, right? Into that, and then running to the Father to be here we are. I just want to sell myself, but I want to be a slave to you, not to the other stuff that I've been a slave to. You know what I mean? And then the Father takes that and just lifts us up to, again, this place of Son.
And that's how the Father describes his Son. He says, "My son was lost and has now found. Yeah. He was dead, and is now alive." This life of sin, this life of debauchery, this squandering what God has given us, the inheritance that God has given us, only leads us to this being lost, being dead, right? Until we return. So the Father sees the Son far out in the distance, welcomes him back, has this big celebration, and then we get to see this resentment in the older son. And very typical response, right? Like he gets angry at his brother for his brother's action, going away, doing whatever. But notice how everything he's angry, everything he's been holding inside comes out against his father.
Yeah.
Like, you don't celebrate with me. You don't give me this. You don't do this. Like, it all comes out, but he's really upset at his brother.
Yeah.
Right? And how often does that happen in our own lives, too? We're upset at one thing and we take it out on
the other. I don't even think he talks to
people.
his brother at all, does he?
No, an interesting
Not in
detail
this
here
parable,
is that he refuses to go into the banquet. The older son refuses to go into the banquet, and same thing. In the same way that the father doesn't imperiously wait for the prodigal son to come and apologize, or the father goes out to the older son.
That is with him.
That it's there's again, you want to contrast the older and younger son, but there's so much alignment between they're at how they get it wrong in the same way in opposite directions. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I think too, and that's okay. So now putting ourselves in that position of the older son, I can't tell you how many times. There is the gospel the week before. I can't remember what it was, but I was sharing with you some of the things that you're saying, and like how many times we do judge from our Catholic pedestal. I'm going to suggest that we're sitting there and we like see someone come in with a coffee to church, and the proper response to that coffee in church is, "Hey, you must be new here. Why don't you come sit beside me?" Like that's the proper way to kind of, But a lot of times, instead, we sit there and be like, "Well, how dare they bring a coffee into church? Look, they're still wearing their hat." They're, we judge and we hold it over we hold it over them without ever talking to them, without ever we kind of have placed that judgment on top of them. And so again, the same kind of thing is that we're that older son. We're now how dare they come in and try to be what we're how we are, we're the good son here. We're the one that lived up to what our father wanted and all that kind of stuff. I feel like oftentimes, I don't know about anybody else, maybe it's just me, but sometimes I slip into that. I have to catch myself and be like, okay, that's the wrong way of thinking about this. How are we supposed to evangelize? How are we supposed to love? And the Father shows us how to love through that. Yeah. But oftentimes, how many times when we read that part and I reflect on it, I think, how many times have I slipped into that older son feeling no, you don't get to come to church. You don't get to go to confession at the end of your life after you spent a whole life of debauchery and then come back and give one confession, get to go to heaven. That's not fair. I've been living my life as a good Catholic, listening to all the rules and doing all that stuff, but then you get to go to confession at the very end and then just have it all, that feeling, I get that, but that it puts it out to the rest of the world too, right? Is look at what I'm doing. It's taking it the wrong way. You're doing it for the wrong reasons, obviously, if that's the way you feel. And I find myself sometimes when we read Gospels like this and I reflect on my own life, I go, okay, Lord, help me love the way that you love. Help me, see people the way that you see them and not the way that I want to see them, right? So.
Yeah, it totally misses the point that, the brother's back.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how long the brother's been gone.
No, enough to squander all his inheritance.
Enough to squander, enough to suffer, enough to be with the pigs, enough to travel to a distant country, enough to travel back, right? So it's been a while. And not any sort of joy from the older brother to know that his younger brother is safe, or at least back home, right? And the family is reunited. Just immediately just went to his own perspective. And how many times, like you said, we hold grudges against people that we just, we just don't let it go. We don't believe that people deserve a second chance.
Yeah, and that there are temptations that appeal specifically to the pious. So there are, you have that kind of perspective. And again, this is targeted at the Pharisees who, they're, who
believe to be.
You need to, and you have the feeling of injustice. What you're saying is okay, this is last minute confession. And I've been working at this for decades. I've been trying to, and a big part of growth in the spiritual life is growth in virtue and understanding of justice. How should I act? What is the proper way? And it feels unjust. It feels like somebody's doing an end run on the rules, and this is infuriating. But the parable itself is a commentary on the relationship between mercy and justice. And a lot of times people want to set those in opposition. They say that, it's unjust that this person receives mercy because, justice means proper rewards for proper efforts, and it's the father correcting the older son is the father correcting the Pharisees, is correcting you and me, because again, this parable is probably the most famous parable.
Yeah.
Maybe the Good Samaritan gives it a bit of a run.
Very close.
But I think because of the first son, because of the dramatic arc of their conversion, and from an experiential standpoint, we're that once in our life, or we should only be that once in our life. We should really kind of have that perspective. But we're the older son for most of the rest of our life. We have the perspective of the older. So again, for it to call into question our own, self-righteousness, our own, sense of, what I'm doing is just. Again, we can lose sight of mercy, and that can cause us to, show a lack of mercy to people. So having the Father's example of, you've been forgiven much, so you can forgive proportionally.
It reminds me of that another parable, but I don't know where it is in the gospel according to this. But is where he goes out and he hires the workers in the laborers in the field, and he pays them, and then he pays, and then at noon he goes out, and then an hour left of the day, and he goes out, and then the people are like, "Hey, no, I spent the whole day. I should get more than that." He's like, "No, that's not. We made the deal that if you do this, Yeah. It just brings back that older son. Always reminds me of that parable. No. You are going to get your inheritance, and everything I have is yours.
Yes, unless you reject. Again, it's just really significant that the older son removes himself from the banquet. So if the banquet is, heaven, and that's the allegorical significance of the banquet. It's not that the father doesn't kick him out. The father's like that by his own kind of indignation or
he
resentment,
leaves the banquet.
Refuses to go in.
Rejects the invitation.
So if Jesus is offering this from an eisegetical approach, as Matt taught us today, which is to share this point for us to find some sort of conclusion from it, what would you say that during this point of the season of Lent, that eisegetically speaking, I just like saying that word, people should take home from this gospel and reflect on at this point of Lent?
That the call again, the call for most of us is probably the call of the older son, and again, we do like the drama of the younger son's story, but really to because it's Lent, it's we're in a situation where we want to grow in virtue, and sometimes our sense of growth in virtue causes us to get an overinflated sense of our own self-righteousness, and it can affect the way that we see others. Again, we should take the opportunity to grow in self-control, grow in virtue, but also as an opportunity to see ourselves as the recipients of mercy, and that would cause us to be more merciful to the people around us.
Yeah.
What's a take home?
For me, it's the Father, to be more like the Father, and I think that it falls very well into that. But it is that no matter what, that we are supposed to love with an unconditional love to whoever, anybody, and whether it be the younger son who has afflicted us wrongly and actually squandered our name so that the whole village would look at us a little differently, or whether it be the older son who isn't behaving the way you'd want him to, not loving his brother the way you'd want him to love his brother, and the father's going out and reaching out to the older son. In all those cases, is the father loving beyond, showing the mercy, and as you're saying, Matt, I think that's one of the biggest points, is that we have received mercy. So some people in their life are going to need to know that they have received that mercy and that love from God, and that's how God sees them. But our greater call, I think, is to be like Jesus, be like God, which is to be like the Father.
Amen. Yeah, I think that whether we're at the point of demanding something for our inheritance, offending our father, offending someone, whether we're in the middle of squandering our inheritance, whether we've left the country, whatever, whether we're angry with our siblings or family members or relatives, whether we refuse to, go anywhere close to the Lord, that there's something that, everyone has in common, and that's the fact that the Father is loving and merciful, and searches for us in the distance, like waiting for us to come home. And I think that's a beautiful thing that people can really reflect on and make that part of our Lenten journey, that God is always looking for us, searching for us, and wants to welcome us back, wants to embrace us, and wants us to know that he's present with us and loves us. So that's all the time we have today on this podcast. If you have your own thoughts about the prodigal son story, or you've reflected on something today that you want to share with us, you can send us an email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com. You can also like and share this episode of The Catholic Buzz. And that's all the time we have today. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele, and we'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.